"It's a surprise, Tanya. We're going with Mom." The confident voice of my husband echoed in the entranceway. While glancing at my happy husband and his mother, I couldn't contain my surprise. Naturally so. After all, this trip was our honeymoon, so it was natural to be shocked to hear that my husband planned to bring his mother along. Confused by my husband's statement, while I was thinking about what to say, he made a face like he was chewing on a bitter bug and voiced his dissatisfaction. "What's wrong? Aren't you happy?" he asked. There was no way I could be. He should have understood that. After all, there was a deep rift between me and his mother, which I had repeatedly complained about. His mother seemed unable to forgive me, the woman who stole her precious son. Every time she saw me, she would unleash obvious sarcasm. Especially troublesome was her act of being the perfect mother when my husband was around. Because of this, even if I expressed how difficult it was for me, my husband would not believe me. Still, it was clear that I had difficulties with his mother. Yet, to proceed with such a plan, what was he thinking? "Did you book Mom's plane ticket? Is the hotel reserved?" I asked, and my husband looked perplexed. "Eh? I thought I'd book it later." "That's impossible. When do you think we booked ours?" I raised my voice. Of course, there was no reservation for his mother. It was baffling for them to think of having her accompany us during the peak tourist season without a reservation. When I explained this point to him, he snorted as usual. "Then, could you give us all the tickets?" For a moment, I didn't grasp the meaning of his words and asked for confirmation, to which he repeated, displeased. "If there's no ticket for my mother, then give me yours. I paid for the trip, so I have that right." The smug face of my mother-in-law entered my field of vision, and I was shocked. I could only be astonished at her attitude. I cannot understand at all what he is thinking. This is not just a regular trip, it's our honeymoon. I can't believe he would plan such an important trip with his own mother. Of course, I would want to avoid even a normal trip with my mother-in-law. As I stood with my mouth open in surprise, my mother-in-law had a smug look on her face. She seems very pleased that her son is prioritizing her. "Come on, hurry up. There shouldn't be a problem since I paid for it," he says. Does he think that just because he paid, he can do whatever he wants? As I ponder this, the cost of the trip suddenly comes to mind. By the way, about the cost of this trip. My name is Tanya. I am 28 years old and work for a company run by my father. Initially treated as a nepotistic hire, my serious attitude and results were recognized, and gradually the people around me began to value me. Nevertheless, because of the fact that I am part of a business-owning family, malicious rumors are sometimes whispered, and occasionally they hurt my heart. In such a situation, my husband Glenn has been my support. We are the same age and have been exchanging opinions frequently as colleagues in the same team since we joined. It did not take long for our relationship to start. While Glenn efficiently handled his duties and contributed to improving performance, he was also trusted by my father. When we announced our marriage, my father immediately agreed. "Glenn, huh? I've heard about you. take care of my daughter." "Of course, I'll make her happy," my husband replied. Watching that exchange, I felt the glow of the moment. At that time, my father was timing the future handing over of the company, and within the company, there was anticipation that Glenn might be the next president. He thought that the sudden marriage of his daughter could be a chance for generational change in the company. Although there was a possibility of entrusting the management to someone outside, having a capable son-in-law would surely have reassured my father. I am not good at putting myself forward, but if a competent son-in-law were to take over management, that would be the best outcome. I suppose that's what he thought. Although my father did not discuss this directly with us, we often talked about business management during meals together, so my husband and I anticipated that it would happen someday. My husband's father has already passed away, and his mother lives alone in her marital home. My husband deeply loves his mother, and during our courtship, if she called for help, he would rush to her immediately. Since she raised him alone, I have always supported, with a smile, my husband's desire to repay her. I think my husband, who can respect his mother like this, is a wonderful person. I was proud to be with such a person. However, since we got married and started living together, I have begun to feel more doubts. "I'm going to see Mom for a bit." This phrase has become my husband's standard line. And he visits his mother every week. "Is your mother unwell?" I ask with concern, but the answer that comes back is that she is not. "Tanya, don't worry about it. It's important to spend some time alone occasionally." Initially, he spoke kindly like that, but recently he has stopped showing such attitudes. On a Saturday morning, I spoke to my husband, who was cheerfully humming a song. "Are you going to your mother's house today?" The good mood changed instantly, and my husband stopped what he was doing and took a deep breath. "Why do you say it like that?" He reacted to my question with irritation visible on his face. Surprised, I shrugged my shoulders. I might have sounded accusatory without realizing it. It was already said. He glared at me and said, "Mom is lonely by herself. I'm going because you have difficulties with her, understand?" I couldn't hide my agitation at my husband's words. It's true that I have difficulties with my mother-in-law. Of course, it wasn't like that at first. She is the woman who brought my beloved husband into this world. I sincerely wish to cherish her. However, affection does not always come back equally from the other side. My mother-in-law saw me as the woman who stole her son. When my husband was away, starting from our first greeting, she would continuously throw cold words at me. The first incident happened right after my husband had gone to the restroom. Her friendly expression suddenly changed, and she scrutinized me from top to bottom, as if assessing my worth. "So, you are the president's daughter. You don't seem like much." Shocked by her words, I was surprised by the drastic change in my mother-in-law's attitude. She continued to spit venom. "You dare to show up here calmly after stealing Glenn from me. Don't misunderstand, I do not acknowledge you at all." Seeing my surprise, she snorted mockingly and made a crude slurping sound with her tea. It was as if it was natural that no tea was offered to me. Mother-in-law. Don't call me mother-in-law. It's unpleasant. I pondered why I had to be met with such hostility by someone I was meeting for the first time. But when I tried to speak up, I was immediately rejected by my mother-in-law. I felt helpless, and as I was confused by the situation, I heard my husband's returning footsteps. The drastically changed mother-in-law once again smiled and offered tea, as if she had forgotten what had happened earlier. "Sorry, I forgot to offer you tea," she said with a light laugh. And when my husband returned, she chuckled, "Mother, you hadn't served the tea yet." "Glenn, your fiancé is very charming." "Sorry for forgetting to serve the tea," said my mother-in-law with a smile. Then she added, "Tanya, don't hesitate to call me mother-in-law." A chill ran down my spine. Since then, my mother-in-law continues to throw harsh words at me only when my husband is not around. It's like she has a double personality. It seems that my husband cannot see her true nature. Even if I talk to him, he dismisses it with "my mother would never do such a thing." He says, "If you're that uncomfortable, you don't have to force yourself to meet her," and he doesn't believe me at all. Initially, I desperately appealed, but eventually, I grew tired of him defending his mother and began avoiding meeting her. Now, I only visit my in-laws' home when absolutely necessary. My husband might think I hate his mother. "Make sure to lock the door when you leave," he said, and today, as usual, he left without looking back. I tried to reach out, saying, "Wait," but missed him. His back blurred through my tears. After the conflict about his mother, he did not return home. There are moments when it feels like his mother is more important to him than I am. Aside from the issue with his mother, Glenn is a wonderful spouse. When I am having trouble with work, he quickly notices and helps, and he actively shares household chores. This is despite his own busy work schedule. It's a relief that he acknowledges there's no need for unnecessary meetings. Holding these thoughts, I browse through the travel brochures. I shake my head and decide to focus on the plans I currently have. It's the preparation for our long-awaited honeymoon. During this trip, I should be able to forget about his mother and have fun. At least, there won't be any sudden calls from my husband. I consider where to go, keeping in pace with my husband, who has just become the team leader for a new project. If possible, I would like to indulge in luxury on this occasion. While turning the pages and feeling tempted, I soon give up on that thought. I left all the preparations to you, so at least I want the payment to come from my account, my husband said. I had intended to pay for the honeymoon together, but he just laughed, not willing to listen. I thought it wasn't right for him alone to bear the entire cost, so I decided to pay for part of it myself. Additionally, being the president's daughter, the sarcasm from my mother-in-law about being extravagant only escalates, which is tough. Thinking about it, I can't help but give a wry smile. Just when I had resolved to focus, thoughts of my mother-in-law invaded my mind again. Let's stop this, I tell myself, and to change my mood, I put the brochure aside and start preparing dinner for my husband, who will be back soon. Then the morning of our honeymoon arrived. As I was bustling with preparations, the doorbell suddenly rang. "Yes, come in," I said as I opened the door, only to be shocked by the sight before me. Mother-in-law. There she stood, dressed in flamboyant clothes with a large suitcase in tow. Noticing my voice, my husband peeked out. "Mom, you're early." While my husband greeted her with a smile, my mother-in-law didn't even glance at me. Unable to hide my confusion, I asked, "Early? What do you mean?" Just as we were about to leave for our honeymoon together, what could her large luggage imply? Could it be that she intended to stay at our house during our honeymoon? Tormented by this thought, my husband cheerfully announced, "It's a surprise. Mom is coming with us." Really? As my husband clapped his hands in joy, a strange sound escaped me in surprise. "What are you thinking?" I pressed. "Wait, what does this mean?" I asked in shock, and my husband declared happily, "It's a surprise. Mom is coming along." As I stood unable to hide my bewilderment, my husband proudly put his arm around his mother's shoulder, saying, "It'll be more fun with Mom along." Seeing this, my mother-in-law smiled smilingly at me. As I incredulously asked, "Wait a minute. Isn't a honeymoon supposed to be just for the couple? Shouldn't we at least have discussed this beforehand?" I tried to keep calm despite the confusion. Even as I was certain I wasn't wrong, my husband seemed to doubt my words. Why can't we understand each other? I wondered. Furthermore, my mother-in-law, seemingly enjoying my distress, hummed to herself. Why must such discord arise on the day we leave for our honeymoon? Doing something like this as a surprise, what were you thinking? I demanded angrily, to which my husband replied, "It's fine because I paid for everything, right?" Noticing my astonishment, he frowned. "No, it's not fine." Could it be that his offer to pay for the trip wasn't just to comfort me but to silence any objections about bringing his mother along? "Wait. That's not going to work," I objected, causing both my husband and mother-in-law to become visibly displeased. "Why won't it work?" my husband asked, and my mother-in-law childishly taunted, "Tanya doesn't want to travel with me, does she?" I felt a headache coming on. The issue isn't about that. "Glenn, what about your mother's plane ticket? Is the hotel booked?" I questioned, causing my husband to look perplexed. "Eh? I thought we could book it later." "That's impossible. When do you think we booked our tickets and hotel?" I raised my voice. Did he really think this could go smoothly without any planning? Though I tried to avoid luxury, the hotel we chose was decent. Especially now, during a major holiday period. There's no way the flights and hotels have availability now. As I pressed the issue, my husband naturally reached out. "Then, could you give me all your tickets?" For a moment, I couldn't grasp the meaning of his words and asked for clarification, to which he repeated, annoyed, "If there's no ticket for my mother, then give me yours. I paid for the trip, so I have the right to do that." The smug face of my mother-in-law entered my field of vision, and I was shocked. What's happening? What am I being told? My mother went through the trouble of preparing, so I've decided that this trip will be just her and me. "We'll go with you some other time," that should be fine. The ease with which my husband favored his mother left me unable to follow. Does he think it's okay if I'm not there? I'll say it again. This is our honeymoon. Just for me and my husband. Being forced to hand over the plans to my mother-in-law, who appeared out of nowhere, is something I cannot accept. He says his mother prepared for it, but that doesn't matter. If he wants to maintain peace, his mother should step back. Yet, I was utterly dismayed as my husband continued to tell me to give up. Come on, hurry up. There shouldn't be a problem since I paid for it, he says. Actually, I was going to keep this a secret. Suppressing a headache, I sighed deeply. Actually, my father is covering the cost of this trip, not you. So it's strange for you to demand the tickets, isn't it? Upon hearing this, my husband appeared bewildered, as if he couldn't accept the fact. That makes sense. He thought he had paid, which is why he could be so assertive. Why would your father do such a thing? He began to question in surprise. I stared at him coldly. My father decided to pay the honeymoon expenses as a gift so we could save up for our future. He had even told me to keep it a secret, considering my husband's pride. Why did you keep this a secret from me? My husband raged, his face turning red with anger. My mother-in-law, too, seemed shocked to learn that my father had funded the trip, and as I listened to my husband's angry voice, my heart rapidly cooled. I had endured my mother-in-law's nagging and my husband's bias towards her for too long, and I finally ran out of patience. If you two want to go, then return the money to my father and cancel the reservations. Please arrange your own funding and start over. Ignoring my husband and mother-in-law's attempts to stop me, I quickly grabbed my bags and left the house. This was no joke. It was not right to use my father's money for people like them. Since I was busy and had been left to handle all the reservations, I had booked the flights and hotel in my name. Because of this, I was able to cancel everything swiftly and got into a taxi. Instead of heading to the planned airport, I gave the driver my parents' home address. When a daughter who was supposed to be on her honeymoon returned home with large luggage, my father was shocked. As I explained the situation, my father exploded in anger. What is this story? Is this some kind of joke? The constant calls from my husband only fueled my father's rage further. I was furious as well. This conversation cemented my decision. Dad, I'm considering a divorce. When I conveyed my resolve, my father calmed his anger and comforted me gently. Without saying a word, he just gently stroked my back, letting me feel his warmth. I'm sorry, Dad. As I let these words slip through my tears, my father firmly grasped my hand. The next day, my husband came to my parents' house with a box of sweets as an apology. Just as I was about to turn him away at the gate, my father intervened. If you're considering divorce, we need to talk properly. Let's hear his true intentions directly. Let him in the house. While I had intended to consult a lawyer, I followed my father's advice and welcomed him. As soon as my husband saw my father at the door, he immediately apologized. I felt irritated at the sight of my husband pretending to be innocent in front of my father. As my husband continued to apologize, I sighed, and my father urged me to lead him to the sitting room. "President, I apologize for the inconvenience caused by this disturbance," my husband said, starting to apologize with his face down on the table, even before the greetings were over. Occasionally, even in private, my husband calls my father President. He used to joke that it had become a habit, but at the moments when he calls my father President, he seems to adopt a business-like attitude. Perhaps it's because he's used to it at work. His practiced way of apologizing was disturbingly perfect. "What is this apology for?" my father pressed, sighing repeatedly. His emotions were the same as mine. My husband just kept repeating, "I'm sorry for causing a disturbance." This was not an apology to me. It was just an insult. As my panicked husband tried to say something, I interrupted him and presented the divorce papers. "Do you know how to fill out these divorce papers? My part is already completed. Please refer to it." Speaking with deliberate politeness, my husband's face turned pale as he looked at the divorce papers. "Wait, Tanya, divorce." It felt like the first time since he arrived at the house that he actually looked at me seriously. I have always been second to him. "That should be fine, right? Glenn, you have your mother." If that is his attitude, I am also prepared to act businesslike and refuse any attempts at reconciliation. "What are you talking about? Why bring up my mother here? She was looking forward to that trip too. We can go on another trip together some other time, Tanya." Aghast at his lack of understanding, I retorted, "Anytime? What does that mean? It was supposed to be our honeymoon." My body shook and I bit my lip in pain from the awfulness. Why would any husband want to bring his own mother on his honeymoon? Where in the world does that even happen? I asked myself, sickened by the thought. Yet, as if to worsen the situation, my husband stubbornly persisted. "It was just a suggestion to go together at first. Wasn't it you who said there were no flights or hotels available?" Glenn said. "Think about it. How could we possibly prepare for such a last-minute plan?" I replied, but it seemed like Glenn didn't understand at all. Unbelievably, he was serious. Glenn showed his anger openly and raised his voice. "Are you saying to send my mother back even though she was looking forward to this trip too?" At that moment, my father intervened and calmed the situation. "Let's end this now," my father said calmly, and after a silence, he shook his head in disappointment. "Glenn, I'm really disappointed," my father said, and Glenn suddenly called him president and straightened his posture. My father watched Glenn standing there with a gaze filled with deep sadness and disappointment. In the heavy silence, my father spoke. "Why did you choose your mother over Tanya in such a situation?" That question weighed heavily on Glenn. Searching for words, Glenn stammered, visibly sweating from nervousness. Even though Glenn could be assertive towards me at times, he could never defy my father. My father continued, "A honeymoon is supposed to be for the couple. You could have gone with your mother any time after that, right? Wasn't it true when you said you loved my daughter?" To this, Glenn shouted, "I'm not lying. I just wanted to treat my mother as important as her." At this sudden outburst, my father looked sternly at Glenn for the first time. "Even if it makes Tanya sad, is that okay?" he pressed, and Glenn lost his words, stammering. Then, trembling, he said, "I'm sorry," but his clenched hands clearly showed the humiliation he felt. His apology was because it was necessary, not because he truly thought the situation was wrong. He was apologizing because my father, the president, was angry, not because he felt the need himself. "Glenn, you are a capable person," my father said, and Glenn momentarily showed a relieved expression, but soon realized he had misunderstood. My father's gaze was icy like a midwinter lake, piercing Glenn with increasing sternness. "However, even if you are good at your job, a person who does not cherish their family can never be trusted," my father declared with a stern expression, emphasizing his words by attempting to hand a pen to Glenn. At this gesture, Glenn visibly shivered, showing signs of deep fear. "Please wait. Please, let's avoid a divorce." "I will change my heart," Glenn pleaded, continuing to refuse to take the pen. Seeing this, my father forcibly took his hand, made him grip the pen, and said sternly, "You should not be apologizing to me." Shaken by these words, Glenn then turned to me, beginning to plead for help. "Tanya, please do something. Please, anything but divorce," he said as he moved to my feet from my father, clinging to my legs and looking up imploringly. "I will prioritize Tanya from now on," he vowed forcefully, but his words felt emptily hollow, as if his tears had already dried up. I could faintly sense the contempt for me hidden behind his words. "Please. If we divorce, I won't be able to pay off the debts." Glenn blurted this out in panic. Confused, I asked, "Debts? What are you talking about?" repeating the new information I had just heard. Then, suddenly recoiling from my feet, he covered his mouth and showed a look of regret. Overwhelmed by the situation, my father and I just silently stared at him. Amidst the tension, Glenn stuttered, well, and finally, gathering his resolve to speak to us, he began, "So, it's about." When the shocking truth was revealed with his fearful demeanor, my father and I were so astounded that all we could do was hold our heads in disbelief. Incredibly, Glenn and his mother had been confident that the position of president was almost certainly theirs, and had been spending recklessly without any moderation. The reason he visited his mother's house almost weekly was also to enjoy a lavish lifestyle with her. "The more I hear, the less I find any reason to keep this man as your husband," Tanya, my father said in disgust, too disappointed to find the words. Amidst this, Glenn finally pleaded earnestly, "Please wait. If I am divorced, how am I supposed to live starting tomorrow?" His continuous apologies, repeated over and over, looked almost mechanical, like a child's toy moving automatically, and were even comical in their desperation. "That has nothing to do with us," I responded coldly, simply waiting for Glenn to sign the divorce papers. Deciding there was no value in further discussion, my father and I quietly decided to drink coffee. Naturally, we did not offer any coffee to Glenn. Though somewhat forcibly written, the divorce was finalized after all the legal procedures were successfully completed. The lawyer my father had hired was extremely capable, and my detailed diary greatly helped the negotiations, ensuring the process proceeded very smoothly. Additionally, when we claimed alimony, including the costs of the canceled honeymoon, there was a request from the other side, through their lawyer, for a reduction. However, my father immediately rejected that proposal, and I couldn't help but laugh when I heard his decision. As for Glenn, rumors of our divorce spread rapidly throughout the company, resulting in a complete change in the atmosphere around him, making it uncomfortable. Consequently, he decided to resign in haste. Since it was a resignation of his own volition, his severance pay was not substantial, and he ended up using all his modest savings to cover the alimony and his debts. As a result, he is now living a very modest life. Regarding his mother, she has fallen ill and is completely bedridden. It seems she's managing to get by with part-time jobs and has been contacting former colleagues for financial assistance, although the truth of these stories is uncertain. Now, these tales have become the subject of jokes at drinking parties. As for myself, my father has finally decided to retire from his position as president, and with substantial support from other employees, it is highly likely that I will take over as the next president. Although I initially hesitated to take on the role due to my discomfort with leading, my father's rare expression of vulnerability, wishing to entrust the company to someone reliable, has renewed my determination. I feel a responsibility to fulfill the expectation my father has placed on me. Initially reluctant, it seems I have inherited managerial talent from my father. Thanks to his continued support as chairman, our company's performance is gradually but steadily improving. With this newfound confidence, I have been increasingly approached at various events for CEOs. I have not yet considered starting a new romance, but a good time to start a new phase of life may be approaching.